Hello and welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast, where we have inspiring conversations with amazing individuals from all around the world and look for ways to create a clean, green and sustainable planet, us and all other beings. I'm your host, Tom Simak, an athlete and fellow plant eater who strives to optimize every living ecosystem. Passionate about looking after this beautiful floating rock we call home and all the lovely creatures as well among it. If you are new to the show and this is your first episode, I'd like to extend an extra warm welcome. I'm truly grateful to have you here with us. For those returning listeners, welcome back. I'm glad to see you've chosen to lend your ears to me yet again. I know in the world where you have 100 different podcasts to choose, I'm glad you've chosen this one. And in return, I will always grace you with the most lovely, informative and entertaining conversations that are even available. With that being said, today's guest is definitely all those boxes. We're speaking to Dotsie Bausch, an exceptional athlete and plant-based advocate. She took home a medal in the 2012 London Olympic Games and won 8 US national championships, 2 Pan-American gold medals, and has a world record. She starred in the hugely popular documentary, The Game Changers and Personal Gold. In 2018, Dotsie launched her non-profit, Switch for Good, with a television commercial featuring 6 Olympians from 4 different countries, and talks about that cow's milk is not part of a high-performance diet. As you can assume, that left waves of destruction amongst different industries, and there's a lot that kind of unraveled from that campaign, and there's a lot we can definitely talk about from it. We'll be talking a lot about their recent campaign with Starbucks and how that kind of went about and what really happened because of that. We'll also touch on the life of an Olympian and the realities, how fitness and health evolves for individuals, and a bit of politics and legislation just to add a little sprinkle to the mix. I think you'll find this conversation wholesome and informative. Strap in, enjoy the chat, and I'll see you on the other side. Dotsie, welcome to the Plant Paradigm Podcast. How are you going?
I am going. I love it. It's so great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on. And I know I flopped and flipped and was all over the place. And I am just so glad that we are here together. And third time's a charm.
Yeah, look, we made it happen. And
we did.
You know, that's fine. You know, life happens. And I think as a interviewer, and I'm sure you can relate in certain ways, there's always situations in which there's a shortfall, whether it's from your end or someone else's end. And it teaches you, it gives you an opportunity to teach you a lesson. You can't get like really down about things that aren't in your control. And I think, you know, I appreciate that about things happening because it levels you to, oh no, this is life.
Yeah, no doubt. It sure is. And it's very heartening when you have wonderful people on the other side that get that and say, hey, things happen when they're supposed to. I believe that. So, yeah.
Totally. I mean, when we first started chatting via email, you were in Spain. What are you, like a global nomad? Is that what's going on?
That sounds like a really cool title. Yeah. No, I just was on vacation for a couple of weeks with my husband. We trained in Mallorca, Spain. Oh gosh, 3.5 months leading into the Olympic Games in 2012, which is the Olympics I went to, the one and only one. And so we have all these great memories and all this nostalgia, and it's a gorgeous island with the best cycling on planet Earth, in my opinion. And we'd always wanted to just go back and take our bikes but be in vacation mode versus like, oh, you have to perform at the Olympics after this trip. So that's what we did. We went for 2 weeks, took our bikes and just rode the hell out of the island and had the best time. So
that's amazing. I mean, are you still keeping up with some sort of training regime?
No, sir. I would not call it any kind of regime at all. In fact, post-Olympics, I ripped all technology off of my bicycle and off of my wrists and off of my fingertips and off of my headband. And I don't want any more data in my life in regards to fitness. I think I have a pretty good sense of it in general, just because I looked at the data for so long and connected that to what my experience was of how things felt. So I have a pretty good sense now. I just love I love riding with clean handlebars. Just nothing staring back at me, not even the time of day, just going for it. And just, so I stay fit. I mean, nothing close to what was before, but just, I just go by feel now.
Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating how you say you stay fit, but nothing to what it was before. I would say, and I don't know if you agree, but an Olympic level fitness is almost contradictory to what health looks like, because you've got these facets of like mental. You talk about technology and this data almost ruling who you are, and you're associating your performance and a good or bad day depending on metrics, when in reality
Mhm.
fitness and health as an overall broad spectrum is so much more than that.
Yeah, you're very intuitive. Yes. And in addition, you know, I I would say it depends on how you define fit, but I would say now from a holistic perspective, I'm more fit than I was at Olympics, because I think it's hard to really recognize, even as an Olympian, but really for anyone to recognize the depth of damage that you have to do in order to compete at that level. And it's
Mm,
not necessarily healthy, quote, right? Like I felt terrible 90% of the time, at least 90% of the time. If you're really tearing down your muscle fibers and your capacity in your chest to carry and consume and deliver oxygen to those working muscles, you have to do that to such a degree that you are just doing an incredible amount of damage, which then we look at rest and diet and all sorts of recovery methods to build back stronger. And that's how you land on the podium. But in real life, uh, that's not something that's sustainable, right? Which is, I guess, why
mm.
I mean, I was on the podium just shy of my 40th birthday. And that's why that reason I just described, the depths of the damage, is why that's so uncommon, because most Olympians, I mean, you just don't make it much past 30 because the damage is so incredible. Now, I
Mm.
started the sport a bit late, so I think that's what allowed me to then have a little bit more, a little bit more left in the tank, a little bit more longevity later on. But I feel better now than I've ever felt in my life in terms of just listening to my body and moving it in the ways I want to move it, and training it and exercising it in the ways that I choose. And I don't deeply suffer anymore. And you are in a constant suffering state when you are training for something like the Olympics.
I mean, is that what you're meaning when you're saying 90% is just almost like a lack of fitness? Is that, how does that incorporate into real life? Is that just complete body soreness? Is that mental fatigue? What does that actually feel like? Because I really want to get something material there, because I know some people
Yeah.
listening to this pod are quite fitness enthusiastic, and I want to know what the red flags are.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I used to feel the worst in the morning. Um, and and Olympic level physical hangover feels much like an alcohol hangover. So
Mm.
after we train 3 times a day as track cyclists, you're doing, a road spin in the morning, you're doing a pretty gnarly heavy weightlifting session, and you're definitely doing a track session, whether that's in the afternoon or the evening after the weight session. So you're really just, training, recovering, training, recovering, training, recovery, repeat the next day. So in the morning, I always used to feel sore, loaded. So people know what that, like, just that loaded muscle feel. It's not sort of the touch. It's just like, there's just so much lactic acid. I'm just completely loaded. I used to feel down. I wouldn't go as, and not depressed, but just down, just, I used to feel mentally just at my max. Like, I can't take anymore. I can't take anything else in. I found it very challenging to do a whole lot of other mentally challenged things, like trying to work in other capacities or whatnot, because it was that just wasn't that much of didn't have much of ability. And as the morning would unfold, you kind of loosen up and come into terms with, training that. I used to take my oxygen saturation levels every morning along with my resting heart rate. And that started to become something I really leaned on, in knowing, and my coach knowing kind of where I was and if I could handle, how much more I could really handle. And we would press it if I wasn't headed towards a peak in racing, right? Like if you're in that deep kind of dark place of training really hard, you don't have a race coming up where it does kind of, you're not trying to peak. But if you're trying to peak, you have to be really careful, right? Like you've got to tread lightly right on that edge. Whereas you can go over the edge if a race isn't, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks away. So it was most of the time a fairly dark place, both physically, mentally, emotionally. And in the beginning, that's really where I noticed the plant-based diet started to change was how I woke up in the morning. I didn't wake up as hungover anymore when I changed from an animal-based diet to a plant-based diet.
Yeah, that's a lot of the time when you're looking at athletes, it's the recovery. It's not that, like, yes, there might be some modalities and some research that, hey, you can train, lift heavier weights, you can train longer, but it's really just about the recovery. When we look 80-90% of the time, I find it so fascinating that it's such a pain cave. Training so heavily. Like I went from training 5 to 10 hours a week and now training for a world record, I'm training 15, 20 hours a week. And I'm like, I'm still in the first month of training. And I'm like, my body's just always a little bit not 100%. And I find that fascinating that, I mean, an Olympic level seems like something torturous. It seems like something, I don't know who in the right mind would want to do. What really keeps you through that tough time when you're like, I am just dying over here?
Well, as you know, there's a, if you really look in the mirror, there's a sick part of us that resides that likes that feeling. There's a little tiny part of me that misses it a little bit, because there's just, as awful as it is, or as painful as it is, there's also no other feeling quite like it in the world. So, I mean, I think basically, what keeps you in is that feeling is not forever. Right? It's not going to sustain forever. It is a momentary, whether it's a day or a week or a month or whatever that you're feeling that way. It's not forever. You know that it's eventually going to end, but that it is a means to that end, right? Like if you don't go there, if you don't work harder than everyone else, and if you don't go deeper than everyone else, and you don't give everything you've got, there's no way you have a shot at even making the team, much less bringing home a medal. You know that as an athlete, there are a lot of people that are willing to do quite a lot to just even make it to the line, to have the chance to compete. So, knowing that drives you, and knowing what's possible on the other side of that. I think the discovery part of me is what loved that so much. It was just like, what is possible? I love discovering, like, in anything I do. And back then it was physical, right? Like, and mental, what's possible? What can I really do? Everyone told me that I was way too old to ever even start this, and that I wasn't going to amount to anything. And I had some coaches of the national team tell me I was not Olympic material. That's literally what they said to me when I was 29. So, I guess I'm saying there's also voices in your head that are saying you can't do something, and you can. You got to try.
It's crazy when you meet people like that. Makes me cringe so hard when someone can really tell you, like, you're not set out for this. And a small part of me is like, they think they know, and they think that, I almost would optimistically say they think they're doing you a favor, because they're like, don't waste your time and your energy to train for this thing, when in all likelihood you're going to fail. Because it's true, in all likelihood most people will fail. So some part of me is like, she's going to fail, let's do her a favor and say no. But then at some other stage, I think there needs to be a conversation to be had, like, hey, you're most likely going to fail, but if it is to be, it's up to me kind of mentality, and they should have offered the opportunity.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And, it's interesting, and in cycling anyway, I think it's this way in a lot of, let's call it more niche sports. you get coaches and trainers that come back into the sport who never realized their dreams.
Yeah.
And those are the ones that, the one specifically that said it to me, I know that's exactly what was going on there. And I didn't figure it out till some years later. But, people's emotions, right? They play a role, they play a part. And it was like, I think he was like, if I couldn't do it at, 18, she sure as hell am going to be able to do it at 28, this is not. And he was looking at raw data. I mean, I had just done a bunch of testing at the Olympic Training Center in Chula Vista on the watt bike and the VO2 max and the lactate threshold. And he was looking at numbers, and, numbers are not the whole story.
It's so funny how we look through this lens or these goggles, and we apply that through everything. Like, we judge life, and this goes beyond this fella who judged you and what you could achieve, but it's through everything. Like, if we were to relate it back to the plant-based diet, it's like, you can be vegan, but I can't be vegan. It's that exact same thing, but except roles reversed. It's like you're something different, but fully just not realizing and being blind to the fact that they're just inputting their own reality onto you. So it's so fascinating how the human brain works like that.
Yeah, you're so right in that comparison. I hadn't really thought of that, but that is true. And you get that quite a bit. Oh yeah, that works for you. Oh, I can't do it because I need eggs. Like, there's always like that one food that they have to, you're like, oh, okay, you just need chicken ovulation. It's just can't cut it without it. But I get it, because I ate animals for 35 years of my life. And I don't think there was really ever one meal where they weren't present in those 35 years. It's a lot of animals. It just the collective public consciousness just doesn't seem to lean into being able to understand how you can sustain or one can sustain without it. And so I get it. I get where they're coming from, but it's like, right, you and I aren't some kind of odd specimen. It's like we're just we're so the different. Same blood and the same like innards as everyone else. And yeah.
But it's so funny because every vegan or every person pursuing a plant-based or a whole foods plant-based diet at one stage would have said, I can't do it. And then it's like always the people who eat it like 3 times a day, eat meat 3 times a day, are the ones that make the switch. Like, it's so funny how it's complete 180.
Yeah. I agree with you. Yeah. Those are the extremists.
It's so funny because people, I thought about this last year a fair bit, and because people think, oh, you can't live without meat. Like that's a common consensus. And, after getting to know and speaking to like Dr. Michael Clapper, reading the works of like Alan Goldhammer, and you're like, these people drink water for 30 days and you think you can't live without meat for, you know what I mean? Like, it's a complete shift. Like, we can live without food for like easily without any supervision. Like 4 days we can do a water fast and be fine. Yet you think you can't live one meal without an animal-based protein. It's so weird.
Yeah, that's always the craziest thing to me when you have folks that, they don't want to go to the vegan restaurant because it's the one meal. And I'm always thinking, it's fine if you want to say that you don't want to do that because you'll just miss it and you don't feel like missing it. That's an emotion. Okay, great. That's it. But because you can't, I'm positive no one ever died of like
one meal
of plants. Like, I'm hoping you're also having a lot of plants with your steak anyway. So if you take, and what a cool experiment just to see how you might feel after, it's like, but we're stubborn, right? I'm stubborn. We're all stubborn.
We're all stubborn in our own ways. So no judgment. It's so funny. Like, I love memes, and it's a thing that I think is incredible in the plant-based culture as well. And something that I thought about for the past few years being plant-based and seeing how people react to certain conversations, it's like they never ate a plant before. And in my head, I awkwardly think like, how do you poo? Like, how do you do that without plants? And I'm like, what is your digestive system going like in there?
I know. I have a cousin who just got out of prison 1 week ago, 7 days ago, and he was in for 7.5 years. And and as he was in there, he learned a whole language, Spanish, just fluent, which
Whoa.
is just incredible. Turned everything around, it changed sort of spiritually and in all sorts of ways, and went quasi-vegan, not completely vegan, because I think he would have died. Anyone would, the prison's here anyway, if you are completely vegan, because it's like, there's not any food, so now he's like a weekend to being, he's like loving it. But he said that in prison, he needed like the whole roll of toilet paper every single time. And now it's one wipe. That's it. He's done. So us vegans, we like to talk about poo like quite a lot, and it's a little weird, but
we're proud. We're proud.
We're proud. But I mean, that is like that. There you go. Right. Like in 1 week, like a complete change in his digestive system, his digestive tract, everything, and how it's working and how it's moving through. And he's like, it's just life changing.
I mean, you've spoken to people like Bushowitz, and his book's incredible. And the science says, one meal can change 7 generations of your microbiome. Within 1 week, your whole biota can change. So it's awesome how it's never too late to make a change. It's like your whole body can change in a week, 2 weeks, 1 month. That's what?
I know. And there's like 3 trillion of them. The microbiota in our, I mean, that's a lot of little live buggers in there that can change over in, 7 days, 14 days, all of them. I know.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's magical.
I mean, amongst all the things you've done, something you started a few years ago, which is Switch for Good. Incredible. And I love following your journey and what you guys do. There's a lot I want to get into, especially the Starbucks campaign, which I followed along very thoroughly. Can you quickly give us a run through for those who don't know what Switch for Good is and what you guys over there do?
Yeah, sure. It's it's a nonprofit organization, and we are activists at the heart of it all, and disruptors. So we aspire to attack activism in kind of unique far corners of looking at what's possible. So not just how the typical activism in this movement is done. And the Starbucks campaign was probably a good example of that we'll get into. But we work from our beginnings. We started with mostly working on behavior change and culture change. We started in a disruptive manner in 2018 when 7 of us Olympians got together and put a commercial on the closing ceremonies of the Olympic Games that year, which were in Pyeongchang, that basically said, we don't need cow's milk to win medals, because here in the States, the dairy industry is the title sponsor of the United States Olympic Committee, first of all. So that's disgusting and makes no sense, but that is the case. And, got milk does got body good. We've grown up with that. So we just made a stake and a claim with that commercial. And then it turned into a nonprofit organization. So today we are just a couple days over 3 years old. And we have, over the last year and a half, really moved into, while also still working on culture change and behavior change, we have moved into the realms of policy change and corporate disruption as well. So, yeah.
Incredible. I mean, let's look at this Starbucks thing. It was honestly genius. It had me 100% fooled. I literally saw the campaign and I go to my partner, Sean, I'm like, oh my God, look at this. This is so cool. Like, we don't have too many Starbucks over here, but I'm like, oh, this is great. And I don't know if you guys really tried to fool the public, or if it was like, no, this is obviously a joke. Like, did you try to make it a joke? Like, I don't understand how well I was fooled.
Well, I think, when you kind of look at traditional ways to make change in the world, the disruptive kind is not always looked at as the right way to go. It's not always accepted. You do end up fooling the public, and you end up fooling, the media. And we had some media that were quite pissed at us. But I've always been intrigued by and love the activism of the yes men. And so for whoever doesn't know who they are, look them up. But they did a documentary in 2003 and it's called Yes Men. Yes, yeah, I think it's called Yes Men. The Yes Men. And what this documentary does is it follows them as they travel around to different conferences as speakers, posing as the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay, they were that, it's a lie. They're not the Environmental Protection Agency, but they went around to these environmental conferences and made gave presentations that shared kind of the new face of the EPA. And it was all these wonderful environmental changes that didn't have to do with being in the pocket of corporate America and corporate greed, which is kind of who the EPA and everybody else is in bed with, generally speaking, here in the States in our unfettered capitalist society. So what that set up was it made it so when they finally revealed that they were not the EPA, people were disappointed. But what it showed was, what's really possible. It really gave them a chance to reveal the issues that are truly facing us from an environmental perspective. And then 3, it made it so the EPA themselves were super bummed that they had to come out and say, yeah, that's not us. So you don't make the EPA look stupid. You make them look like that would be brilliant if that's what you did. So that's kind of what we did with the Starbucks campaign. And the Yes Men guided us every week of our prep for this. And what we wanted to do was really bring forward the idea of dietary injustice or dietary racism, which sounds strong to some people, but up to 95% of people of color cannot digest dairy. Like, it makes them very sick, right? Everything from stomach bloat to stomach discomfort to diarrhea to constipation to itchy, eczema to skin rashes, snotty nose. I mean, the list is really endless. So the fact that Starbucks, and we chose Starbucks because they're the largest coffee chain in the world, we figure we might as well go after the big guns. They charge extra for non-dairy milk. So when you have something, and let's say, if we just say America, 36% of people here, and mostly people of color, can't digest dairy. So that means 1 in 3 people that you serve a cow's milk to, you're making sick, and you're upcharging for something that's not going to make them sick. So we put out a video, which is right on the homepage of switchforgood.org, that was announcing that Starbucks was going to completely drop and eliminate that surcharge or that upcharge. And a lot of people believed it, including Bloomberg and Business Insider and Yahoo and some big media outlets. But what it did, if we had put out that Starbucks should really do this, nobody would have picked it up. Nobody would have been talking about it. Right. So it's called brandalism is I think the term that the Yes Men use.
Very cool.
So yes, it's just, it's being a little crafty and exposing a wrong that would probably not even get any eyeballs or response or energy if you didn't expose it in this way. So that's what we did. And 3.5 weeks later, they dropped the non-dairy surcharge in the United Kingdom. And we have something coming out really interesting on Sunday. We won't stop with the pressure here in the United States. There's 9,000 stores here in the United States. And it's, they'll try to tell you their reason is because the plant milk costs more. When they give out free cream, it's free. I mean, it's free to put cow's cream in your coffee. I mean, I can't even, it's probably hundreds of thousands of gallons of free cream that they give out every year. And with their plant milk upcharge, they charge the exact same amount for a teeny tiny short one as they do for a giant venti. So that just shows you right there that it's the pricing is not to scale. And, they need to do what's right, not what's right for their pocketbook.
I mean, my mind can take this in 100 million different directions. I love the campaign, and I can imagine that there would be a lot of really pissed off journalists. And something I've been talking about a lot recently, especially like we have University of Deakin University down here in Victoria actually did a piece on
Mm-hmm.
media journalism in Australia and New Zealand. They looked at 150 different agencies, and they kind of looked at the word vegan propaganda and found that most actually described vegans as an elite minority. And it's really fascinating how little research really goes into journalism. And it's something I've been thinking about a lot, having kind of studied or looked at journalists as a large and thinking that they're getting incentivized for the wrong thing. It's a cost per click society. And so you've got these non-profits like yourself that are putting out these campaigns, and they work tremendously because you're using one huge thing to your advantage. These journalists do not do research. They look at one thing because they're incentivized to pump out 9 pieces of articles in an 8-hour shift or whatever they do, and they don't have the time to actually give an in-depth opinion piece or research piece based on the actual truth, which is a huge problem in society, especially if we're trying to push a plant-based agenda, because there's headline sensationalism, which is something I think maybe we need more brandalism or whatever the term is, because people just are not doing research, and we need to hit them in the face with the habit of, if you're not going to do research, we've got a lot of campaigns just for you.
Yeah. They're not, you're right. They're not looking deeper. They're not looking at any evidence. They're not reviewing any research. They're just not. It was pretty funny because we got one real snarky email back from Business Insider, and they were like, well, now we're going to cover you again and blah, blah, blah. And that this was just so terrible, and people already distrust the news. And it's like, well, that's your issue.
Yeah.
But
do you respond to emails like that with some more snarkiness? How do you?
Our PR people did, and they said, just leave it alone. But in my head, I responded, is like, oh, is this in comparison to all the press that you've given the vegan media and the vegan organizations, vegan activists in the past year? No, you've never covered one story. So boo-hoo, we'll really miss your coverage. I mean, it's like they were just clueless, even writing back saying that we'll never cover you again. You've never covered us before. Ever in Business Insider, you know what I mean? It's besides it. So it's just like, okay, yeah, that's going to be so sad. We're really going to miss all that PR that you've been doing. He was just clueless, It's like, yeah. Anyway.
I mean, did you get legal pushback from Starbucks? Because really you were spreading misinformation, right?
Yeah, we there's the Electronic Frontier Foundation here in the United States is a nonprofit that is really their main work is keeping the First Amendment alive. So they were wonderfully helpful in just guiding us on, what kind of just what to do and what not to do, what to just be careful. You have to be very careful about trademarks and licensing. So it was kind of like, don't touch that. But this, you can. This is very much a First Amendment right. Where we're exposing a wrong that. And we're allowed to do that.
Yep.
So they were wonderfully helpful. And then I was very aware that, corporations have gotten really smart over the last, 20 years, where 20 years ago, Starbucks would have come after us. But I think they've learned that the best thing they can do is just leave it alone, because they were just going to get so much more pushback from other activists and from people who are just like, really, this is what you're going to go after, this little tiny nonprofit. So they've learned. I didn't think we would hear from them, because in terms of like trying to come after us for representing them wrong, because they know that what we're suggesting and saying that happened is a powerful change that they know they should make.
Yeah. Did they post any? I didn't follow if they posted something on Instagram or Facebook in regards to that.
I don't think they did. We know that. And I wouldn't expect that at all. I mean, to even say that they basically want to pretend like it didn't happen, and we knew that from day one. We knew the media would be all over it, but that they were just going to be like, okay. What they did do was send their communications person the media got the emails from Starbucks corporate and saying, "Oh no, this isn't true." So that happened within 3 hours of the first release.
Mm-hmm.
So they did that, and then they had their customer service. They had like when a bunch of activists called the following day to talk about this, they had like a form letter that the customer service read saying, "We charge more for plant milk because it cost us more." So they're still churning that same line that, yeah.
Well, did they contact you guys at all?
Mm-mm.
At all, really? So when the UK, can we assume that the UK Starbucks did this because of the campaign?
Oh, I can't assume anything. There's all sorts of reasons that they would have done it. We would never really have taken credit, but we woke up that day that it happened on, I think, December 29th, and all of the media had given us credit. I mean, so who knows what nobody knows what, I'm sure it was a combination of a lot of things,
Yeah.
I would venture to guess, but I don't know.
I hope it was. Like, I understand that the UK has a very, very growing subpopulation of vegans that are, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's like one of the most in the world. So I'm assuming that very much was a constituent to that amongst the campaign and amongst other things. But I'm really excited and hopeful that this gets communicated across the board through the US has probably the most Starbucks chains in the world. I don't know how much Europe has. I'm not sure in Canada, but that would really be the nail in the coffin. If the US does it, then, game, set, and match.
Yes. Yeah. We're working on it.
Yeah.
You'll be the first to know if
I
we
will
succeed.
be. So there's a lot of things wrong with animal ag, as I'm sure a lot of people listening knows, and I'm sure you know yourself. Switch for Good in my research works primarily with dairy. How did you guys come to pick dairy instead of these other facets?
Yeah, dairy kind of just gets it's a lot of times people's last thing to give up, and I think it's something that gets easily overlooked. People tend to go straight to the animal, but conversely, it is the animal food, the animal product, that if you give up first, you will notice a shocking difference in the way that you feel, versus if you give up, let's say you keep every animal product in, but you give up salmon or turkey tomorrow, you're probably not going to have this life-altering experience physically in the next couple of weeks. Now, over time, you're going to notice a big difference in your blood serum and all sorts of issues in your arteries. But giving up dairy, whether you're lactose intolerant or not, is a complete game changer in how you feel and the experience of your gut and your output and your energy levels and it is so toxic to the human body, not to the baby cow body, but to the human. So that is part of the reason. I don't think that enough of us in this movement look at what is going to assist people in feeling their amazing, their very best self the quickest. And it's 100% if you give up dairy. But really from, as I went through before, kind of our origin story, it was a group of Olympians that were just sick and tired of having this supposed food group pushed on us as like the only way to really properly recover from hard training. Cow's milk. It was disgusting being at the training centers. There was like literal milk bars, and I'm not even kidding you.
What's a milk bar?
Just all sorts of disgusting breast milk in different flavors, and then it's also in different varieties. So cottage cheese and like yogurt cups and froyo, but all made with breast milk.
Right.
And it for those of us that knew, we're all the wiser. It just got really maddening and very frustrating. So that's also part of the reason that we focus on it, because it doesn't get it doesn't get the focus that it needs. And, anytime I think that you come up against something that, makes you feel like you're being sold a lie, which is the exact lie that they're selling with dairy being, the only way to really recover from exercise. For me anyway, that makes me want to fight. So.
Yeah, it's so strange. Like when we talk about dairy on this show, it's predominantly about the environment because the footprint is absolutely humongous. But as you were talking, it's so funny. We don't realize how much dairy really gets consumed, even in comparison to the actual flesh of the animal. So if we're thinking about dairy, and a lot of people, gain weight with dairy, because if you think about it, the average person might have 2 cups of coffee a day, maybe 3. And then with each one, they're having, a cup of milk, which I'm not sure on the calories of that, but that's quite a fair bit of fat. And then on every meal, animal product or not, we might sprinkle some Parmesan, some cottage cheese, maybe have some mozzarella with our toast, like whatever it may be. It's strange how much we really consume of it. Like I haven't read the data on how much the average person does consume, but when you just look at cultural behavior and attitude towards dairy, you're like, oh my God, you would eat this like maybe 5 times a day, maybe 6. So it actually makes sense why you would start there, because it's not only the one where you'd feel the most difference, but also it probably is the one that would have the most difference because of how much literally you would consume of it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I know it slips in all sorts of different ways into a variety of meals.
Yeah. I mean, what are sort of, amongst the campaigns and the activism that you guys have done, have you found a certain way of talking to people or psychologically getting into their minds on why they should ditch dairy? Like, what are the fact? Is it the racial issue that you're bringing up most? Like, what is it that you're actually saying this is why you should ditch dairy?
Well, from a corporate standpoint and from a policy standpoint, as far as the U.S. government goes, because there's no government on planet Earth that's more embedded with the dairy industry than ours, to the tune of about $80 billion a year. Our government pours into the dairy industry. I mean, it would be a non-industry. It wouldn't even be happening if we didn't supplement it, because there's not enough people to even consume it. And as it decreases, consumption greatly decreases over time. There just wouldn't even be, they're literally being stood up, artificially. But so from a corporate and a policy standpoint, definitely the injustice, the dietary injustice, the dietary racism around it is horrifying. You would never in a million years would we have a fluid that we would force on our children in school. So we have about 51 million children in public schools here in the United States, and schools are paid on the amount of cartons of milk, of half pint of milk that a child takes. So it is they have to have a carton of milk, but it makes 75 to 95% of children of color sick. You would never have a fluid that you would force on, and if it made 75 to 90% of white kids sick. I mean, it's disgusting. That is the truth, and that is the reality of what's happening. And they're not my percentages. It's the percentages are directly from the National Institutes of Health, and we've had them for about 100 years. We know the rates of lactose intolerance, and lactose persistence. I mean, we can go into why people are lactose intolerant and why some people are lactose persistent. But so from that standpoint, yes, I think it is besides the environmental and the health and the output and the performance and the animals and all the reasons that is something from a policy structure that needs to be addressed and changed. But from a personal perspective, just like human to human, oh my God, it's how you're going to feel. Because everybody wants to feel freaking better. And it's just, you take it out and it's like, what happened? And even if you're, like I said, if you're lactose intolerant, it is a complete game changer in like 24 hours. I mean, it's just like your whole life change. If you're not lactose intolerant, I'm lactose persistent, or lactase persistent is the right way to say it. I felt so much better. I was more lethargic. I wasn't, I didn't have as much pep or energy. It just changed so much of my experience of how I felt on a daily basis. So, that's like the easy part, because people want to feel better. And I'm just try for 7 days, for 10 days. You don't even need them. You don't need 21 days. If you're lactose intolerant, you need 12 hours and your whole life is going to be changed. So yeah, human to human, it's just like, go to what people care about, feeling better.
Yeah, I agree. And it's just a shame that dairy is such a hard thing to give up. Like everyone I speak to, just like, I gave up meat, I gave up my fish, gave up my eggs, but milk and cheese, especially cheese, it's like, oh my God, like why?
Like it's a romance.
Yeah. It is. It's this weird romance, and like I get it. It's a high form of calories, high form of fat. Your body's developed to crave that. They structure this food so it's hyper palatable. It makes sense. But I really want to dive back into what you mentioned, which is lactose intolerance and lactase persistence. Can you kind of dive through what that maybe is and how to identify which one you sit in?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So all of us are born with a lactase enzyme in our gut, like every mammal, not just humans, every mammal is born. And that enzyme is specifically to help us digest the lactose in our mother's breast milk. So like humans have it so we can digest the sugar, one of the sugars, lactose in our mother's breast milk. So the body is extraordinarily efficient, smart and efficient. And so that specific enzyme is designed to turn off around the age of 4, 5, 6, depending on the culture where you are in the world, depending on the average length that people breastfeed. One could assume that the body is set up that way because we're not supposed to be breastfeeding past like childhood, right? So that's just an assumption that I've made, that's the reason. That's backed up by quite a bit of science. But so if you are Northern European, like I am, I'm like 99% Scottish. That part of the world has been milking cows the longest. They think about 6,000, 6,500 years. So because our body is so efficient and smart, if you keep feeding it something that it needs to eventually adapt to, you may have what's called a genetic mutation where that lactase enzyme stays on past infancy, past breastfeeding years. So most white Northern Europeans have genetically mutated, and that lactase enzyme stays on, which means we're digesting lactose from whatever source, whatever mammal we want to take it from. And so we don't feel bad. We don't feel, our stomachs don't hurt from having dairy. But most of the rest of the world have only been milking cows for 100 years, 200 years. I mean, in Asia, that's why 98% of Asian populations are lactose intolerant, because they don't have the genetic mutation, because they just started this horrible idea to milk cows, right? So if you talk to like somebody that's 35 years old from Japan, and they're here in the States now, they didn't even grow up on milk. Right. That's how new it is. That's to crazy. So many of the populations. So they don't have that genetic mutation. So the lactase enzyme just turned off. And so they are lactose intolerant, which really that's it. I don't think that is a fair term, because it sounds bad. It's like, that's bad. You're that's lactose intolerant.
Like inferiority.
Right. It's totally completely normal. I'm the mutant with the genetic mutation that had to mutate over time to be able to now, right, that my body originally was not designed to do. It was designed to turn off because I'm done with breastfeeding. So it pisses me off that that's the term that we use, right? Because really I'm lactase persistent, and that's just the facts, and that's what it is. And you're lactose normal. If your enzyme turns off at whatever age, 5, 6, 7. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it, because I think a lot of people who are lactose intolerant think like, oh, something's wrong with me.
Yes.
They have this weird thing like that.
Yeah, it sucks. That's the industry. That's the industry dollars at work.
Good marketing.
Yep. Yeah. What you feel like something's wrong with you or something's weird. And the sad part is, I mean, there's so many people that, they like believe that you need this breast milk from this very specific mammal, a cow, to thrive or to have strong bones or to, get whatever you think you're getting. And it's such a lie and it's such a misnomer. And so they keep consuming it all the while feeling terrible and it's making them sick. And they think they need it because the industry told them they need it. No science told them they need it. The industry told them they need it. Sucks.
Also fascinating, Dotsie. One milk I find really weird is lactose-free dairy milk. I just find that is the weirdest thing. Like, if you're lactose free, would you rather drink this milk, which is processed and it's churned and it's done whatever it's had to do and it's had to get to lactose extrapolated, and then that's gone back into the carton instead of just soy milk or oat milk or almond milk or whatever else the milk is, where it's really just, it's a few steps in the procedure. I find when I look at the shops and I'm like, lactose-free milk, I think, oh, it's vegan. It's like another thing, it's like a soy milk or something, but it's dairy milk. And I find that the weirdest thing. Like, I just don't get it, Dotsie. I don't get it.
No, I know. It sounds like it's like Franken milk, if you think about it, right? Like, it's like they've like, here it is, and then they've distorted it and removed this and taken this out to make it do whatever. And people don't want to have a burger made of beets and pea protein because that's not a real meat, or you know what I mean? It's like, that is some weird ass milk that where they've had to, like you said, extrapolate or remove something from it in order for you to be able to digest it. That just makes you question, well, hold on a minute, what's wrong with it in the first place?
Yeah. As I'm getting kind of aging slowly, I've really started to value the least amount of processing as possible and try to eat and drink more of that stuff. Like, and that kind of leads to, hey, the healthiest diet kind of shown is a whole foods, plant-based diet. But if you eat these fake meats or whatever it is, it's like I always opt for those that have the least amount of processing, which is why the lactose-free milk doesn't make sense. So if I wanted a plant-based burger, I'd be going with the black bean, chickpea, sweet potato burger, or whatever it is, instead of the Impossible meats and of the such. And that's the lactose-free milk is interesting, but it doesn't make, I don't know.
I know. It's just strange. I was trying to on our website there's a milk calculator that people might find interesting.
What does it do?
Where you can look at the calculation of dairy milk versus whatever other milk you want to pick. I think we've got like maybe 8 different ones, cashew and almond and soy, and what it does to your body and what it does to the planet. So you can like,
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like one of those things, those calculations almost reminds me of, if you've been plant-based for this long, this is how much gallons of water you've saved, this is how much environment you've freed up, this is how much CO2 has been sequestered based on how long you've abstained from animal agriculture products. But I really want to know, we have to shift consumer behavior really to follow through on our agenda of trying to reduce people's intake of dairy or whatever else the product is. And a large part of that works in legislation and works in parliament, and we're looking at subsidies that really have to change as soon as possible so that it makes plant-based foods cheaper. Because really lentils should be 5 cents a kilo.
Yeah,
like, they should be incredibly, incredibly cheap. And milk should be, or dairy milk, should be quite expensive. Have you thought on any kind of theories or suggestions on how we can really change legislation as soon as possible?
Well, so we're working on what I was just speaking about, but I didn't really go into detail in terms of right now in the United States, and we're working here because that's where we have the impact in possibly changing the legislation, right? You have to be from that country. Although I'd like to work on it worldwide, but so we have a system here with dairy milk, like I said, where the schools get paid to give this, to force children to take a half pint of milk with every meal. So it's the breakfast and the lunch program at school. So we're working to change that so that soy milk is brought into school so children have a choice of something that maybe won't make them sick, definitely, at the same reimbursement as dairy milk and at the same option and opportunity to be able to choose it. Because right now, what we have, the rule, the law is that if a child wants to have something other than dairy milk, they have to provide to the educator something that we call a milk note, which is a note from either their physician or their parent on why they don't want to take a cow's milk and why they want to have the soy milk. And then they have to bring the alternative with them, right? It is not available to them. So if you just look at the dietary justice aspect of that, like we said earlier, under no world would we live in if cow's milk made 75 to 90% of white kids sick. Would that even be considered that we would freaking have that in schools? Well, that's what it does to children of color. So that's the first step in a long line of legislation that needs to be changed, of how embedded our government is with corporate America, and specifically here the dairy industry, like I said, to the tune of $80 billion with the B dollars a year. So we've got to get an alternative in there that has the same amount of macronutrients. That's very important, especially for the children that are part of the WIC program that is subsidized. And these children may not get food at home, right? They may not get dinner. So they've got to get all their nutrition from school. So we needed to make sure that it was that we're thinking, that we're making sure that it's a milk that has a good macronutrient profile. And soy and dairy have the same macronutrient profile. And then, as you know, soy has a lot of benefits over the dairy milk and the saturated fat and trans fat and some other areas. But so we have to start there. And it's been really interesting having conversations with members of Congress thus far. There is so much fear around pissing off the dairy industry. And it's like, oh my God, this is an industry. It's not. So many of them take money from the dairy industry for their campaigns. And so for us here in the States, I don't really think that we're ever going to get out of the pockets of, meat and dairy and pharmaceuticals if we can't have a system where our politicians are not allowed to take corporate dollars. I mean, right there is not going to end until that is broken up. That monopoly is broken up, and they are not allowed to take money from corporate interests, because then they can't put pressure on them anymore. They're not going to care. They're going to look at the science. They're going to look at the data. They're going to say, oh my gosh, this has to be out. It makes like 75% of these kids sick. This is crazy. But there's so much fear. I mean, they believe in adding this alternative for dietary justice. But I can't tell you how many conversations we've had where the lawmaker says, but you're not trying to get rid of dairy, right? It's and they literally say it like that. Like there's a fear surrounding, because that's where
you're not going to get rid of my paycheck, right? Yeah.
They might as well just say that. Yeah.
It's really fascinating, because I feel like it's a way to kind of go forward. And I had a chat to a few months ago, which I know you interviewed as well, Laura Reese. She kind of works on the philosophy of, no, we have to get to these politicians first. So if the system, like, obviously I would personally, your solution of having that completely redundant, like no lobbyists have a place in politics and no lobbyists have a place in how legislation gets passed, because that to me is a threat to democracy when dollars speak more than science and truth. But
100%.
Getting to the politicians first is something we can do now without corrupting, the whole system, or not corrupting, but really changing it as a really large upscaled level. It's so fascinating, because there's so many potential solutions like yours and Laura's and there's a million others, but they're just so hard to get through because the almighty dollar just seems to be so incredibly powerful in those scenarios.
Yeah, it does. But you can't, nothing is going to change for sure if we don't fight And I think we'll start to see a new way forward. I do believe that, if we pray, and that's a negative word, but if we pray on the inherent goodness of people, there are some in there that want to do the right thing and want to have let's just start with an alternative. That's what we're starting with. Let's just start with something that's not going to make them sick. And then you have you have a drink in school where more kids are choosing it and they want it more and it tastes better. About 30% of the dairy that's served in schools gets dumped. So that's a way to go, Washington. Like, that's really, like, Wall Street would have fun with that. I mean, that's a ridiculous, idiotic investment. They spend about $2 billion a year just on that school lunch program the government does. So 30% of that goes in the trash can. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So there are some, definitely some bottom line economic pocket, de-lining reasons that they'll, as that begins to be exposed, we'll probably start to make some new decisions.
I mean, amongst all this, we're obviously advocates for a plant-based diet and soy milk over dairy milk, but you got this whole industry which you're quite engrossed with. Anyone who follows you on social media sees that you have a passion for animals. You want this change to happen, and there's a lot of differing opinions in the space, and there's a lot of sub arguments in the vegan or plant-based arena. And I was wondering if you have any, I guess, cons or problems with the vegan or plant-based space or communities.
Oh gosh. I think the thing that I see the most is whoever they are, right? Just this space, this movement will tend to put perfection before progress. And we're way too small in the first place. But I don't think we're going to get where we want to get if we don't put progress ahead of perfection. Perfection is an illusion anyway. I learned that as an athlete, is it is a complete illusion. It does not exist. But we tend to be, an all or nothing, seeking only perfection and don't even bother trying to change it if it's not almost completely perfect. And, we get a lot of kind of flack for that, of like, getting, just strides towards getting partway there. I mean, yeah, I want dairy out of schools. It's freaking disgusting. And it's horrifying for the animals on the planet. But that's not going to happen tomorrow. I mean, I've learned that the hard way. So what can we do that's better for people and will become better for cows very quickly if soy milk is offered and it starts getting chosen and they have less of a need for cow's milk? I mean, we have to completely decrease the demand. And once the demand is almost completely gone, that an industry can't stand up anymore. So
I love that. It follows and riffs off that saying of perfect is the enemy of good, and kind of striving for that progress over perfection. I really like that perspective, especially in the space where there's an abundance of work to be done. Like this, I don't think we've really scratched the surface in like, yes, there's something upcoming. Yes, it's a growing movement, but oh my God, so much more needs to change.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. I don't know if I'll be alive when it comes crumbling down or not.
I mean, you're going to live to like 150. You're pretty healthy. You got to be, what's going on?
If I live to 150, I think I'm going to see it. But
yeah. Now at the beginning, we mentioned, this was actually off record, that you were doing a bit of work in my home country. So you were doing some work with the University of Sydney. What are you guys doing down there?
Well, I've always been, ever since my athletic years, really fascinated by, evidence-based nutrition and just research in general, right? There's so much new evidence that was coming out as I was headed to the Olympic Games in the med tech space that turned into the sports tech space of technology that can look into the human body and look at athletes at rest versus when they're at work. We've always had a lot of technology, or especially cycling, because we've had power meters since 2000. Loving reading new evidence, as an athlete. As I came into this movement and came into forming and founding Switch for Good, and then starting to go down the rabbit hole of so-called, quote, air quotes, if you're not watching this, dairy research, which is, I haven't seen a piece of it that's not skewed, that doesn't have flawed methodology. I really just had this passion for making sure that eventually, when we have the funding to be able to provide sound research in this space. So we are soon to be starting a pilot study that is looking at it's looking at a hormone differential in weightlifting males between cow's milk and soy milk as a recovery drink post exercise. So we'll see how that goes.
Is that in the context of like a protein shake?
No, it's literally cow's milk versus soy milk. Just the straight up. Yeah.
And this is a pilot study. So this is your first kind of dollop in the space as organizing something. Yeah. Is that something completely new and difficult and extremely weird?
Yeah, it's I'm completely out of my comfort zone. And before I got on with you, the researchers are not new at this, right? Like, so in terms of doing research, right? It's not their first go at it. So that's good. It's just my first go at paying for it. And, but it's a fascinating journey. I mean, reading the perspective, reading the methodology. I love learning and looking at all that they are, the current evidence, the current papers that we have that have a something to say or an impact on the possibility of how ours will come out. There's you always base new research, I'm learning, on papers, current papers, right, that showed this, and then we're pushing it one step further by showing this. So it's just been, you definitely feel like I'm like deep in a rabbit hole of, and I have every question I ask sounds like an idiotic question to the researchers, I'm sure, right? But I have to be thinking of trusting them that the methodology is bulletproof. I need to be thinking about, okay, what's the New York Times going to say? And how is the public consciousness going to accept the findings? And do the findings matter enough in relation to performance or output, or, to make a splash? Because there's all sorts of research you can do that if you kind of like get bring your head up out of the mud in the intricacies of the research, that you go, well, okay, that's fascinating as a researcher, but the public is going to be like, I don't care, because so I'm really looking at making sure that we have something that is unraveling a feeling that men have about, estrogen and testosterone and
will this hurt my gains? Yeah.
Right. So, it's I feel like my brain's going to blow up most of the time.
Do you have an ETA on when because studies, from my knowledge, take a very
we're a year out from anything coming out for sure. I mean, we've got and it's been a year in talking about it. Yeah. So right. Yes,
a while.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it. And kind of coming on the tail end of today's episode, I wanted to give you an opportunity to just speak your mind in the form of Dotsie's words of wisdom. This could be anything relating to what we've been talking about. It could be something that's been on your mind in the past week, month, or year. It could be a TV show. It could be something completely random. But I'd love to give you the platform to just speak your mind for a minute or so.
Yeah, so I have been yammering on for over an hour, but this is something that's come up for me this week, and it seems to come up almost every week. And the genesis of this conversation was, I was feeling extraordinarily frustrated and low about a year and a half ago with running Switch for Good. And it was like, is it, just things that weren't working, and I was feeling extremely beaten by industry and by the dairy industry specifically. And like, this is just how is this ever really going to end? This isn't. So I guess it was typical activist hardships. My heart was just broken. I know the horror that goes on behind closed doors every day for a dairy cow and her calf. And it keeps me up at night. And this very wise human, who is a scientist, who is actually part of this study that we're doing, who I was speaking to an hour ago, he said to me, Dotsie, you've got to remember that everything matters deeply. And at the very same time, nothing matters at all. And, it depends on what you're going through right now, if you're listening to this podcast and how that landed on you. And if you're not in a similar space that I was in, it could easily just bounce. You could just be like, oh, yeah, okay, well, yeah, sort of. But if you find yourself in that pain cave that us activists get in too often, really, for our own good, I'm hoping that can be helpful, because I think of it almost every day. It really helps me just lighten up. I wake up every morning and I can't imagine doing anything else. So if I think, I have a joke with my husband all the time, I'm going to become a professional dog walker. It just feels like I just want to do something. I love walking and I love dogs and I walk mine all the time. And that would just be something that would be not so heavy of a burden. But then I think I literally can't do anything else than this. I physically, emotionally, I cannot do anything else. I cannot fight this fight. And so if that's the case, then it needs to be meaningful, because, otherwise, why? It needs to mean something to you. But at the same time, maybe none of it really matters. And then that just takes that weight off, and that burden lifted that we feel so often as activists. So.
Yeah, I love that. I hope someone who is going through something maybe similar or something in a completely different topic kind of takes something home with that. And as you were talking, I kind of think with the realm of activism and other things, you have to ask yourself, and I always ask myself when it comes, when I see Switch for Good stuff, it's like, yeah, how can I support you guys? I'll do a share every now and again. I'll comment, make sure the algorithm gets that. So, you get pushed around a bit more, and it could come at the form of anything in any way you want to support someone with something you believe with. But as an activist who's out on the streets, or who's running Switch for Good, or who's doing whatever you're doing for the animals or for yourself or for the community, I always think in my mind, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when?
Yeah.
And yeah. I think that's really a confidence booster, because it means no matter what you're doing today, and you might have a rest day, you might do whatever, you're doing something to push yourself forward. And I love that. And I want to extend what I'm saying to begin kind of saying thank you to you. So obviously the work you guys do is incredible. And that campaign with Starbucks in particular was one of the best campaigns I've ever seen in regards to pushing a plant-based agenda and movement. And I think that's, I understand what you're going through, whether it's yourself or the other people in the team or someone else who runs a community. I think it's incredibly impactful, and I can understand the weight on your shoulders. It's, sometimes it is heavy. You feel like that statue of Plato, whoever it is, with the planet on your shoulder there. And, I just wanted to take a moment, because as activists, I'm sure you don't hear a lot of this, but obviously we're fighting for the voiceless, the animals, a lot of the times. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of them, but also behalf of myself as both a human on this beautiful planet that we're trying to help, but also as, a vegan, someone who shares my ideologies, my belief system, is fighting for something that's more than who we are as humans. So I really want to take that moment to thank you for all of that. But also, as an overarching theme, thank you for your time today and sharing your wise words. I hope someone has gotten one little golden nugget out of your brain today. I'm sure you have. But yeah, thank you so much for coming on this conversation. I can't wait for round 2 when this study comes out or another exciting campaign breaks through. And I guess I'll speak to you next time. Thank you, Dotsie.
Thank you. It's really been a pleasure. You're a fantastic interviewer. It was fun and went by fast. Thanks.
Hi there. Welcome to the end of the episode. I really hope you enjoyed the whole way through. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you for Dotsie for sparing some time and coming on and sharing her wisdom. It really was quite informative and wholesome. So if you want to connect with her or switch for good, I've left all the links in the show notes below. If you enjoyed this conversation, please rate, review, and share with someone you think will find a lot of depth in this podcast and conversation. That is the best way you can help out this show. And if you want to join the conversation and continue the conversation forward, hit us up on Instagram at plant.paradigm, where we share lots of abundant tips and different carousels on what's going on in the world, and of course, snippets of the show and a bit of BTS. That is all from me today. I will see you guys in next week's episode. Stay happy, eat plants, peace.